Life is strangely full of decisions. Endless, constant, incessant decisions. We spend an enormous amount of time making decisions, don't we? What to eat, what to wear, where to go, what to say, but how often do we really make the decision that matters most? The decision to simply be ourselves, not the person your parents wanted, not the person society expects, not even the person you think you should be, just you. Plain and simple you. And here's the curious thing. The moment you truly make that decision, the moment you genuinely choose yourself, not out of arrogance or selfishness, but from a deep recognition of who you truly are, everything begins to change. Not because you're doing something special, but because you stop doing something very unspecial. You stop pretending. So let me ask you this. When was the last time you looked at your life and honestly asked yourself, am I living this for me, or am I living it for them? For the invisible audience in your head that's always watching, always judging, always keeping score. Most of us never ask ourselves that question because we're too busy performing, too busy trying to get it right, to make it work, to prove something to someone we'll probably never meet. But what happens when you stop? What happens when you finally choose yourself? Well, let me tell you, it's not what you think. You see, we've been taught that choosing yourself is selfish, that it means abandoning others, ignoring responsibilities, running away to some island where you can sit under a palm tree and forget about the world. But it's not about that at all. Choosing yourself is not about rejecting life. It's about accepting it. It's about recognizing that you're not a stranger in the universe, but part of it. And the moment you accept that, the moment you stop fighting against your own nature, something extraordinary happens. You relax. Now, most people don't know how to relax. They think relaxation means lying on a couch doing nothing. But true relaxation, the kind that changes your life, isn't about doing nothing. It's about doing what you do without resistance, without the constant voice in your head saying, am I doing this right? What will they think? Is this good enough? When you choose yourself, that voice begins to quiet down, not because you've defeated it or suppressed it, but because you stop taking it so seriously. You realize that the voice was never yours to begin with. It was just an echo of all the people who told you who you should be. Your parents, your teachers, your friends, your culture. They all had good intentions, of course, but they were trying to turn you into something that fit their image, their plan, their idea of what a good life looks like. And the problem is that their image was never meant for you. Think about it. Have you ever tried to force yourself to wear clothes that don't fit? It's uncomfortable, right? You can't move properly. You can't breathe. You spend all your time adjusting, pulling, trying to make it work. That's what most people do with their entire life. They walk around in clothes that don't fit, pretending they're comfortable, wondering why they feel so exhausted all the time. Choosing yourself is like taking off those clothes and putting on something that actually fits. And the moment you do it, you realize how much energy you've been wasting. All that effort you put into being someone else, maintaining an image, proving your worth, simply vanishes. And what remains is this simple, easy presence, this feeling of being at home in your own skin. But here's where it gets interesting. When you finally choose yourself, when you stop trying to be what others want and start being what you are, people notice. Some of them won't like it. In fact, some will feel deeply threatened by it because your authenticity reminds them of their own falseness. Your freedom highlights their prison, and that makes them uncomfortable, so they'll try to bring you back. They'll question your choices. They'll tell you you've changed. They'll say you're being selfish, irresponsible, foolish. And if you're not careful, you'll believe them. You'll think maybe they're right. Maybe you should go back to how things were. At least it was safe. At least people understood. But you can't go back once you've tasted true freedom. Once you've felt what it's like to live from your own center instead of from someone else's expectations, you can't unlearn it. It's like waking up from a dream. You can remember the dream, but you know it wasn't real. And this is what people don't understand about choosing yourself. It's not a one-time decision. It's a daily practice. Every morning you wake up and you have to make the decision again. Am I going to live for myself today, or am I going to live for them? Am I going to honor what I know is true, or am I going to pretend? Most days it's easy. You wake up, you feel clear, you know what you need to do. But some days it's hard. Some days the old patterns come rushing back. The need for approval, the fear of rejection, the desperate desire to fit in. And on those days, you have to be kind to yourself. You have to remember that choosing yourself isn't about being perfect. It's about being honest. Now, let me tell you something that might surprise you. When you choose yourself, when you truly commit to it, you don't become more isolated. You become more connected, because authentic connection can only happen between authentic people. When you're pretending, you can only connect with other people who are pretending. It's like two masks talking to each other. Because you are you, because in your being, I recognize my own being. This is what the mystics have always known. We are not separate. We only think we are. And the moment you choose yourself, you begin to see through that illusion. You begin to recognize that the self you're choosing is not this small, separate ego. It's something much larger. It's life itself expressing through this particular form, this particular body, this particular moment. Let me give you an example. Imagine you're a wave in the ocean. For years, you've believed you're just this small wave separate from all the other waves, trying to survive, trying to be bigger, trying to last longer. But then one day you realize that you're not just a wave, you're the ocean. You've always been the ocean. The wave is just a temporary form, a pattern, a dance the ocean is doing. When you see this, everything changes. You're no longer afraid of crashing on the shore because you know you're not going to disappear. You're simply going to return to what you've always been. And suddenly, being a wave becomes fun. It's play. It's the ocean enjoying itself, expressing itself, celebrating itself. That's what happens when you choose yourself. You realize you're not this small, scared thing that needs to protect itself from the world. You are the world. You're life itself. And when you see that, the whole game changes. You're no longer playing to win. You're playing to play. But most people never get there because they're too afraid to choose themselves. They're too afraid of what might happen if they stop pretending. What if I lose my job? What if my family rejects me? What if I fail? What if I'm alone? These are real fears. I'm not saying they're not. But here's the thing. The life you're living right now, the one where you're not choosing yourself, where you're constantly trying to please others, meet expectations, prove your worth, is that really living, or is it just a slow death? Because when you don't choose yourself, you die a little bit every day. Every time you say yes when you want to say no. Every time you smile when you want to scream. Every time you pretend to be happy when you're actually miserable. You're killing something inside you. Something precious, something irreplaceable. Your authenticity. And without authenticity, life loses its flavor. Everything becomes gray, mechanical, automatic. You wake up, go through the motions, do what's expected, and then you go to sleep, and the next day you do it all over again. Is that what you came here for? To be a machine? To be a good little robot that does what it's told? I don't think so. I think you came here to be alive, to feel deeply, to love completely, to experience the full range of what it means to be human. And you can't do that if you're not being yourself. You can't do that if you're hiding behind a mask, playing a role, following a script that someone else wrote for you. So what happens when you finally choose yourself? You wake up, not gradually, not completely over the year, but suddenly, violently, completely, like someone throwing open the curtains in a dark room and letting the sunlight come flooding in. Everything you thought was solid begins to dissolve. Everything you thought was important begins to seem trivial. And everything you ignored, everything you set aside because it didn't fit the plan, that begins to become clear. You start to see your life as it really is, not as you've been telling yourself it is, not as others have told you it should be, but as it really is, right here, right now, in this moment. And maybe you realize you're in the wrong job. Maybe you see that your relationship isn't working. Maybe you understand that the life you've built is not the life you want. And that's terrifying because now you have to make decisions, real decisions. Not the safe decisions, not the comfortable decisions, but the decisions that honor who you truly are. This is where most people back down. They get to this point and say, no, this is too much. I can't do this. It's easier to go back to sleep, easier to pretend everything's fine, easier to keep the mask on. But you can't, not really. Once you've seen the truth, you can't stop seeing it. Once you've felt what it's like to be yourself, you can't go back to being someone else. The door has opened And even if you try to close it, there will always be a crack, a ray of light reminding you of what you've lost. So you have a choice. You can stay where you are in the uncomfortable comfort of a life that isn't yours, or you can walk through the door. You can choose yourself totally and completely without apology. And when you do, something miraculous happens. The fear doesn't disappear. The uncertainty doesn't vanish. The challenges don't magically resolve themselves. But you change. You become present. You become real. You become alive in a way you never were before. Because you're no longer divided. You're no longer at war with yourself. There's no longer one part of you that wants one thing and another part that wants something else. You're whole, integrated, complete. And from that wholeness, everything flows. Your work becomes effortless because you're no longer forcing yourself to do things you hate. Your relationships become genuine because you're no longer pretending to be someone you're not. Your life becomes meaningful because you're finally living it according to your own values, your own truth, your own heart. This is not easy. Let me be clear about that. Choosing yourself is perhaps the hardest thing you'll ever do because it means letting go of everything you've been taught, everything you've believed, everything around which you've built your identity. It means facing your shadows, those parts of yourself you've been trying to hide, suppress, deny, the anger you've never expressed, the sadness you've never allowed yourself to feel, the desires you've never allowed yourself to acknowledge. All of that has to come out, has to be seen, has to be integrated. And this process is messy. It's uncomfortable. It's painful. There will be moments when you question everything, when you wonder if you're making a terrible mistake, when you long for the simplicity of your former life, even though it was killing you. But you keep going. You keep choosing yourself day after day, moment after moment. Not because it's easy, but because it's true. And slowly, something begins to change. The resistance starts to diminish. The fear begins to loosen its grip, and you begin to discover something you never knew was there. Peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from controlling everything, from having it all figured out, from making sure nothing bad ever happens. But the kind of peace that comes from accepting what is, from trusting life, from knowing that whatever happens, you'll be okay, because you're no longer pretending to be something you're not. This peace is not fragile. It doesn't depend on circumstances. It doesn't require everything to go your way. It's there in the good moments and the bad. It's there in success and in failure. It's there when people love you and when they abandon you, because it comes from within. It comes from that place inside you that's always been there, waiting for you to notice it. That silent center, that still point, that awareness that observes everything but is touched by nothing. When you choose yourself, you discover this center. And once you find it, you realize it's the only thing that matters. Everything else, all the external things you've been chasing, all the goals you've been pursuing, all the approval you've been craving, they're fine. It's nice to have them, but they're not necessary because you already have what you need. You already are what you're looking for. And this changes everything. Your relationships change, not because you leave everyone behind, but because you show up differently. You're no longer desperate for approval. You're no longer willing to compromise your truth to keep the peace. You're no longer afraid of being alone. And paradoxically, this makes you much better company because you're not needy, you're not dependent, you're not constantly seeking validation. You're just there, present, real, yourself. And the right people, those who resonate with your energy, with your truth, with your authenticity, show up. Not because you're looking for them, but because like attracts like. When you're being yourself, you naturally attract others who are being themselves. And these connections, these relationships are different. They're deeper, more fulfilling, because they're based on truth. Not on pretending, not on playing roles, not on meeting expectations. Just two people being real with each other, being human together. Your work also changes. Not necessarily what you do, but how you do it. When you're choosing yourself, you can no longer tolerate work that violates your values, that drains your energy, that makes you feel dead inside. You begin to seek work that aligns with who you are. Work that fills you, that energizes you, that feels natural and flowing. And when you find it, or when you transform what you already have, work stops being work. It becomes expression, creativity, contribution. You become more productive, more innovative, more effective. Not because you're trying to be, but because that's what happens when life flows through you without obstruction. Even your body changes. The tension you've been carrying for years begins to release. The headaches, the stomach problems, the chronic pain. Much of it was your body's way of telling you that something was wrong, that you were living out of alignment, that you needed to choose yourself. And when you finally do, the body relaxes. It heals because it's no longer at war with itself. It's no longer trying to be something it's not. So here we are. I've told you what happens when you choose yourself. The fear, the resistance, the transformation, the peace, the authenticity, the freedom. Now comes the real question. Will you do it? Will you make the decision? Will you commit to living from your truth? Even when it's hard, even when it's scary, even when no one around you is telling you you're right? Or will you keep pretending? Will you keep wearing the mask? Will you keep living the life everyone else thinks you should live? The choice is yours. It's always been yours, and it will always be yours. But I can tell you this, life is short, shorter than you think. And every moment you spend not being yourself is a moment lost forever. You can't get back. You can't redo it. It's gone. So why waste it? Why spend your precious time on this earth, trying to be someone you're not? Why give away your life to fulfill expectations that were never yours in the first place? Choose yourself. Not tomorrow. Not when things are calmer. Not when you have more courage. Now, right now, in this moment, choose yourself and see what happens. I promise you it will be worth it.